The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I think it's important that people understand how inflation usually works. And if you look at the decade of the 1940s and the 1970s, you saw huge spikes of inflation. The 1940s, it got as high as 19%. And then it'll be in that range for a couple of years, and it'll come crashing down to, in the 1940s, it actually went to deflation at the end of the 40s. But it never happens in a straight line. But even if you do have a period of a year of, let's say, deflation where prices are actually going down, they still go up to this high water mark, right? So prices are still astronomically high and far exceed the rate of wage gains, even if the inflation in of itself is quote unquote transitory.
Yeah, wage gains always follow inflation. So there'll be a lag time, for the average person, it could be as long as a year, which is completely unfair. In the meantime, anyone on fixed income, on a fixed salary, they're losing right now. And, that's something that we should all be concerned about. If there's one thing that private individuals can do to fight what's happening to them right now, is to try to take back their personal financial freedoms as much as possible. Gold plays into that, cryptocurrency plays into that, building wealth and independence from needing the government in your life plays into that. And then you have the ideology of, and I can't believe some people still believe this, because I know you and I do not believe this at all, but the ideology that somehow the government's going to do it better for us than we can do it for ourselves. Right. That somehow we should trust them with these huge decisions that are life altering for us. Because somehow they're smarter than us, and they know what's best for us. And I just don't think that's working anymore. And unfortunately, a lot of people either don't talk about that. It's not important in their lives. They just kind of go on with the way things are. But I think, to get away from centralized planning, which is a theme I know you've been hitting a lot. I've been listening to your interviews. I really love it. It really taps into my kind of day-to-day thinking as well. I think people need number one, create that financial independence as much as you possibly can for yourself and for your family. And two, break away from this ideology that the government is out for our own best interests, and they're going to do what's in our best interest all the time. They've proven over and over again that's not the case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, just from a personal standpoint, involves unplugging from all of the noise, if you will. Before we started recording, you're telling me about your personal situation up in Canada. Do you want to go into that in that town where you live? And,
Sure.
You're saying how it just helps you, number one, enjoy life because life's short, but number two, just get out of this whirlwind of insanity, and it helps you ground you, and it allows you to think and really focus on what's important, and then make better, or hopefully better, financial decisions in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, George. And it's not for everybody. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a lifestyle guru. I'm not a life coach by any means. I work too much. I'm not a perfect husband. I've got my faults, but when it came to choosing where we lived, I think we nailed it. We live in a town in the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It's a town of 6,000 people. So I think if you ever have the opportunity to live in a small place and have a little bit of acreage and have the ability to grow a garden and do all those simple things, I know a lot of these people and you live according to this lifestyle, but I do have a lot of mentors that have their own acreage that are able to provide for their families in worst case scenarios. And I think COVID kind of proved that way of thinking, it doesn't make you some sort of conspiracy theorist. It actually makes you a very wise person to go against the curve. And there's a great quote I was reading a little bit before the interview that Mark Twain he said, if you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And it's for me, it's one of those things. It's just like, do I want to be like everyone else and follow the government's leader? Do I want to break away and try and do it my own way? And maybe I'll be wrong at the end of the day, but I think it's been healthy for myself and for my family to undertake that whole kind of lifestyle mission.
Yeah. I firmly believe in that quote, or, just said another way, when everyone's on one side of the boat, you probably want to go to the other side of the boat. I think we'll have big spikes of inflation, and then the rate of inflation will come back down based on government spending until we get a central bank digital currency. So you could see, let's say this year it's based on the CPI. Let's say it's at 7%. Next year it's at 11. Then it goes back down to maybe 5, or maybe it goes back down to 4. And then the government starts spending some more money. Then it goes back up to 8, and then it goes up to 10, and then it goes back down to maybe 3 or something like that. This is very consistent with what we saw throughout the 1970s and the 1940s. So I don't, but what I don't believe is I don't think we'll go through 2 or 3 years like we did at the end of the 40s, where we have actual deflation as measured by the CPI, where we have a negative print there. I don't see that happening. And when I kind of look on social media and in the normal media, mainstream media, like we were saying, a lot of people I think have that same view, and that makes me worried that potentially, you know what I'm saying? So how do you kind of reconcile that in your own head?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so you're really describing kind of inflation volatility, where it's not a
Yeah.
linear relationship. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm an expert on inflation. Certainly not. I'm an expert on gold. And so I'm always just trying to tie it back to what the impact is going to be on gold and silver investors. But
You know what it seems like to me, Mark? It seems like, I don't want to say that's an exception to the rule, but it seems like it could be, just because psychology is such a big component of inflation, right? So meaning that the more people that are on that one side of the boat, the higher the probability is that we see continued inflation. The more people that believe there's going to be inflation, the higher probability that we actually see continued inflation, because it changes people's consumer behavior. Do you think maybe there's something to that?
Definitely. Well, it's interesting. Now we're getting really deep into kind of human psychology, but I don't want to go way off topic here, but remember that all these things that we're talking about are all created by man. All of these ideas, all these concepts of, the economy, inflation, how we control inflation. This is all made up. This is all derived from human minds. This is not something that was on Earth when we got here, when it all started. This is not a naturally occurring thing. This is a human thing.
Yeah, Moses didn't get it from the top of Mount Sinai.
Right. And it's funny, like we live in a world now where all of our problems are self-made problems. Like we've created all of these problems, all these stresses, all these complexities are all man-made. So I think, going back to what we were talking about before, living in a small town, it's moving away from complexities that are man-made and created and trying to move back to simplicity. I think so many people are craving that right now. See a lot of that. I see a lot of people from the city moving out to the country, trying to get some, small acreage to do that kind of thing. But going back to what you said, I would tend to believe that. I think that human nature is such that once we kind of see that message presented in front of us many, many times over, we'll tend to actually reenact what's being described to us, because it becomes our norm. And that goes back to the quote. It's like when that becomes the norm for the majority of people, you need to stop and think, why is this becoming the norm? Why am I allowing this to happen? Or why is it happening? And reflect on it. So yeah, I think you're probably right. That's pretty deep though. I don't know.
What you hit on right at the beginning of the interview, where prices go up at 20%, but wages only go up by 6% or 10%. And you compound that over 4 or 5 years, and people can't put food on the table. They can't put a roof over their head unless they get more and more handouts from the government. And, that puts them in a mental state that I think is far more unhealthy. And you take away their hope, and kind of this is the powder keg you get. Exactly.
Powder keg is a perfect way to describe what I was trying to say earlier. And yeah, I was thinking about it earlier, like anyone in the 80th percentiles, if you have a solid income, and you have a solid investment portfolio, times like this probably aren't that bad. You can definitely get through this because you've got, again, it goes back to financial freedom, creating your own financial freedom, creating a situation where you don't have to succumb to the result of what the government is doing or not doing in some cases. But for a lot of people below that line, yeah, I can only imagine that it's pretty brutal. It creates a lot of pressure at home when you can't pay your bills or feed your kids or send them to the right school or get a car to get to work or whatever it might be. It's really tough.